The neon lights of Nexus Prime cast everything in sickly hues of purple and green, making the sprawling alien megacity look like a fever dream. Jackson Kane pulled his worn leather jacket tighter as he navigated through the Crimson Bazaar, his cargo hauler's license dangling from a chain around his neck. The weight of his military past sat heavy on his shoulders, 3 tours fighting in the Outer Rim wars, only to come home to a world where humans had become little more than cheap labor for their alien overlords. Steam hissed from food vendors selling unidentifiable alien delicacies, while holographic advertisements flickered overhead in languages he'd never learned. Jackson kept his head down, focused on reaching the delivery point for his cargo of rare minerals. Credits were credits, and he needed them to keep his ship running and his belly full. The crowd parted around him like water, humans instinctively recognizing one of their own who'd seen too much combat, aliens dismissing him as just another human worker. That's when he saw her. She was tied to a massive advertisement billboard, her slender form dwarfed by the towering display of alien luxury goods. The girl couldn't have been more than 17, her lavender skin marked with the intricate patterns that identified her as Zerian, one of the more humanoid alien species. Her long silver hair hung in matted strands, and crude rope bound her wrists and ankles. A handwritten sign hung around her neck, "For sale, cheap." Jackson stopped dead in his tracks. Around him, the crowd continued its relentless flow. Alien, shoppers examining wares, human workers hurrying to their destinations, street vendors hawking their goods. No one looked up. No one questioned it. It was just another day in Nexus Prime, where the powerless disappeared into the machinery of commerce. But something in the girl's eyes caught him. Even from a distance, he could see the defiance burning. There, barely contained beneath layers of fear and exhaustion. She wasn't broken, not yet. Her gaze swept over the crowd with the desperate hope of someone still believing in rescue. "Move along, human." The gravelly voice belonged to a Thurlac. Enforcer, his 6 arms crossed menacingly over his barrel chest. "This doesn't concern you." Jackson's hand instinctively moved to the plasma pistol concealed beneath his jacket. Old military habits died hard. What's she accused of? Accused? The Enforcer's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his species. "She's property, legal salvage from a debt collection. Now move." Property! The word tasted like poison in Jackson's mouth. He'd seen enough worlds where sapient beings were reduced to commodities, had fought in wars supposedly to prevent this kind of thing. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd come home to find it flourishing in the heart of the galaxy's most civilized city. The girl's eyes found his across the crowded bazaar. For a moment, everything else faded. The noise, the lights, the danger. She mouthed a single word: "Please." Jackson had survived 3 wars by knowing when to fight and when to walk away. Every instinct screamed at him to keep moving, to finish his delivery, to stay invisible in a city that crushed humans who stood out. He had no money for bribes, no influence with the authorities, no legal recourse in a system designed to protect alien interests. But he also remembered what it felt like to believe in something worth fighting for. "How much?" he asked. The Enforcer's eyes narrowed. "More than a cargo hauler can afford. Walk away, human, before this becomes your problem too." Jackson reached into his jacket, passed his weapon, and pulled out a plasma cutter. Standard equipment for his trade. I said, "How much?" The Enforcer's hand moved toward his own weapon, but Jackson was already moving. 3 quick steps brought him to the billboard's base. The plasma cutter's blue beam sliced through the ropes like they were paper. The girl collapsed into his arms, her slight weight reminding him how young she really was. "Run!" she whispered against his chest. Around them, shouts erupted as more Enforcers converged on their position. Jackson lifted her easily. Military training had kept him strong despite the years of civilian life, and pushed through the scattering crowd. He didn't know her name, didn't know why she'd been there, but he knew the look in her eyes, and he knew that in a city where everyone had learned to look away, someone had to look back. The revolution would start with a single human who still believed that people weren't for sale. The maintenance tunnels beneath Nexus Prime reeked of industrial waste and forgotten dreams. Jackson's boots splashed through ankle-deep water as he carried Kira through the maze of pipes and conduits, her breathing shallow against his chest. Behind them, the sound of pursuit echoed through the metallic corridors, shouts in multiple alien languages, the whine of energy weapons charging. "Left," Kira whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant clamor. "There's an old transit hub." Jackson didn't question how she knew the underground so well. Right now, survival trumped curiosity. He shifted her weight in his arms, feeling the tremor in her slender frame. The rope burns on her wrists had begun to bleed, staining his jacket. The transit hub was a relic from the city's early days, a circular chamber with abandoned platforms jutting into darkness. Jackson set Kira down gently behind a massive support pillar, then peered back the way they'd come. No immediate signs of pursuit, but that wouldn't last long. "Thank you," she said, struggling to sit upright. In the dim emergency lighting, her lavender skin seemed to shimmer, and he noticed the intricate silver markings along her temples weren't just decorative. They pulsed faintly with her heartbeat. "Don't thank me yet. We're not safe." Jackson activated his comm unit, cycling through frequencies. Static filled the air. "My ship's docked in Bay 47. If we can reach it, they'll be watching it." Kira's voice carried a weight of experience that seemed too heavy for someone so young. "Once you're marked as a dissident, they monitor everything. Your ship, your contacts, your credit transactions. You talk like you know the system pretty well for someone who was tied to a billboard." She was quiet for a long moment, her violet eyes studying his face. "I'm Kira Voss. My father was Commander Thane Voss of the Liberation Front." The name hit Jackson like a plasma bolt. Every human in the Outer Territories knew of Thane Voss, the Xerian military officer who'd defected to fight for human rights. His assassination 6 months ago had made headlines across the galaxy. "Your father's dead," Jackson said softly. "That's what they want everyone to believe." Kira struggled to her feet, wincing as the movement pulled at her injuries. He discovered something, evidence of a conspiracy reaching to the highest levels of the Nexus government. They couldn't just kill him quietly. They needed him discredited first. So they faked his death and used me as bait. Her voice cracked slightly. "Someone in his inner circle betrayed us. They knew he'd never stop looking for me, so they made sure he'd find my body eventually, after they'd broken me, used me as an example of what happens to rebels' families." The sound of boots echoed from a nearby tunnel. Jackson drew his plasma pistol, the familiar weight reassuring in his hands. "We need to move." They climbed through a maintenance shaft that led to the lower levels of the cargo district. Jackson's ship, the Iron Phoenix, waited in the shadows between 2 massive freight haulers. It wasn't much to look at, a converted military transport, with more patches than original hull, but it had gotten him through 3 wars and countless cargo runs. The ship's cramped interior felt like a sanctuary after the chaos of the tunnels. Jackson sealed the hatch and activated the stealth systems, hoping they'd mask their heat signature long enough to plan their next move. Kira collapsed onto the small medical cot, exhaustion finally overtaking adrenaline. Jackson retrieved the med kit from the wall locker, his hand surprisingly gentle as he cleaned the rope burns on her wrists. "You didn't have to do this," she said, watching him work. "You don't even know me. I know enough." He applied medical gel to the worst of the wounds, trying to ignore how her closeness made his pulse quicken. "I know you didn't deserve what they did to you." Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Recognition of shared pain, perhaps, or simply the acknowledgement that they were no longer alone in their fight. When he leaned down to bandage her wrist, she reached up with her free hand and touched his cheek. The kiss was gentle at first, hesitant, as if they were both surprised by the connection. Then Kira's arms went around his neck, and Jackson forgot about pursuit and danger and the impossible odds they faced. For a moment, there was only warmth and the taste of hope on her lips. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "This is crazy," Jackson whispered. "Everything about today is crazy." Kira's smile was the first genuine expression he'd seen from her. But it's the first thing that's felt right in months. The ship's proximity alarm chimed softly. Outside, searchlights swept between the cargo haulers, growing closer. They had minutes, maybe less. "Where can we go?" Jackson asked, already moving toward the pilot's chair. "There's a safe house in the Amber District." But Jackson... She caught his arm as he passed. "Once we do this, there's no going back. They'll never stop hunting us." He looked at her, this brave, damaged girl who'd somehow become the most important thing in his world in the span of a single evening, and made his choice. "Then we better make sure we're worth hunting." The Iron Phoenix lifted silently into the neon-soaked night, carrying two fugitives toward an uncertain future and a love that had been born in the shadow of rebellion. The safe house was a converted storage unit in the bowels of the Amber District, where the city's poorest humans scratched out an existence beneath the notice of their alien overseers. Jackson had been forced to abandon the Iron Phoenix after discovering a Nexus tracking beacon welded to the hull, a parting gift from his former military contacts who'd clearly chosen self-preservation over loyalty. 50,000 credits, Kira said, staring at the bounty notice flickering on a stolen datapad. "They're serious about getting us back." Jackson looked over her shoulder at the holographic wanted posters, his scarred face and her distinctive Xerion features broadcast to every corner of Nexus Prime. "That's more than most people see in a lifetime. We won't be able to trust anyone." The safe house was barely large enough for two people, with a single sleeping alcove and basic facilities. They'd been hiding there for 3 days, living on ration packs and recycled water while the net closed around them. Outside, enforcement patrols had tripled, and every human caught on the streets after curfew faced interrogation. "Tell me about the wars," Kira said that evening, settling beside him on the narrow cot. She'd been asking him to share pieces of his past, and he found himself opening up in ways he hadn't with anyone in years. "Which one?" Jackson's laugh held no humor. "The Kalari uprising, where we thought we were liberating an oppressed species only to discover they were the aggressors. The Titan mining conflict, where corporate interests disguised themselves as territorial disputes. Or the Xerion border war, where I learned that peacekeeping was just another word for conquest." "The last one." Her voice was soft. "That's where you learned to hate my people." "No." He turned to face her, seeing the uncertainty in her violet eyes. "That's where I learned to hate what war does to people, all people. Your father's rebellion, it's the first cause I've seen that's actually worth fighting for." She was quiet for a moment, tracing the scars on his forearm with her fingertip. "He used to say that revolutions aren't won by armies. They're won by individuals willing to stand up when everyone else looks away, like in the bazaar." "Like in the bazaar." She leaned closer, her breath warm against his neck. "I keep thinking about that moment when you looked at me. No one had really seen me in months. I was just cargo to be moved, a problem to be solved. But you saw me. The kiss that followed was different from their first, deeper, more desperate, as if they were trying to hold on to something precious in a world determined to tear it away." When Kira's hands began to work at the buttons of his shirt, Jackson caught her wrists gently. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Everything's happening so fast." "I've been a prisoner for 6 months," she said, her eyes never leaving his. "This is the first choice that's been mine to make." They made love slowly, tenderly, on the narrow cot while the city hummed with the search for them outside. Afterward, Kira lay curled against his chest, her silver hair spilled across his shoulder like moonlight. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. The words should have terrified him. They'd known each other less than a week. Their future was uncertain at best, and loving someone in their situation was a luxury they couldn't afford. Instead, Jackson felt something settle into place inside his chest, a certainty he'd never experienced before. "I love you too," he said, pressing his lips to the crown of her head. They were woken 3 hours later by the sound of approaching vehicles. Jackson was on his feet instantly, weapon in hand, while Kira gathered their few belongings. Through the small window, they could see enforcement squads surrounding the building. "How did they find us?" Kira asked, her voice tight with controlled fear. Jackson was already moving toward the emergency exit, a maintenance shaft that led to the adjacent building. "Someone talked, or they got lucky, or—" He stopped, a terrible realization dawning. "The medkit. I treated your wounds with military-grade healing gel. It contains nanotracers designed to help medics track wounded soldiers." The building shook as the enforcement squads breached the main entrance. Kira squeezed into the shaft first, with Jackson close behind. They could hear boots thundering up the stairs as they crawled through the narrow space, emerging into an abandoned factory 2 buildings away. "We can't keep running like this," Kira said as they caught their breath in the shadows of defunct machinery. "They're tracking us somehow." "The nanotracers will flush out of your system in another day or 2, Jackson said. But even as he spoke, he knew it wasn't just about the medical gel. Someone was feeding the enforcers information, someone who knew how fugitives thought, where they'd hide, how they'd move. "There's something else," Kira said, her expression troubled. "The safe house. Only 3 people knew about it. Me, you, and Dex Hartwell." "Who's Dex Hartwell?" "One of my father's most trusted lieutenants." She looked sick. "If he's working for them, if he's the one who betrayed us in the first place, then nowhere is safe." The sound of approaching sirens made the decision for them. They ran through the industrial district, staying to the shadows, while behind them the abandoned factory lit up with searchlights. The hunt was intensifying, but so was their resolve. Whatever came next, they would face it together. "We need to go on the offensive," Jackson said as they paused in an alley to catch their breath. "Find your father, expose the conspiracy, give people something to rally behind." Kira nodded, her jaw set with determination. "Then let's start a revolution." In the distance, the sirens wailed like the city's death song, but neither of them was listening anymore. They were too busy planning how to bring it all down. The meeting was supposed to be a trap, but Jackson and Kira walked into it anyway. Desperate times called for desperate measures, and they needed answers more than they needed safety. The abandoned factory in the industrial quarter looked like countless others. Rusted machinery casting long shadows in the dim light, the air thick with the smell of oil and decay. "You came," said Dex Hartwell, stepping out from behind a massive forge. He was older than Jackson had expected, with the weathered look of a career soldier. His human features were marked by cybernetic implants along his jaw, military enhancements from the border wars. "Where's my father?" Kira demanded, her hand resting on the weapon Jackson had given her. "Alive, but not for much longer." Dex's expression was grim. "Commander Vex has him in the Obsidian Tower, maximum security level, scheduled for public execution tomorrow morning. And you're going to help us rescue him." Jackson's instincts screamed danger, but they needed information. "That's the plan." Dex activated a holographic display showing the tower's schematics. "But first, you need to understand what you're really fighting. This isn't just about human rights or even your father's rebellion, Kira. This is about the Xerian civil war spilling into human space. The hologram shifted to show star charts, trade routes, military deployments. Commander Vex isn't just some corrupt official. He's the advance guard for a Xerian military faction that wants to use human space as a staging ground for their war against the homeworlds. Your father discovered their plans. The conspiracy he mentioned, Kira breathed. Bigger than that. They've been systematically destabilizing human colonies, creating refugee crises to justify military intervention. Nexus Prime is their test case. If they can break human resistance here, they can do it anywhere. Jackson studied the schematics, his military training kicking in automatically. This rescue is suicide. Even with inside help, the tower's impregnable. Not if you have the right distraction. Dex smiled grimly. News of your escape has been spreading through the human quarters. People are talking about the cargo hauler who stood up to the system. Give them something to rally behind, and they'll provide all the distraction you need. That's when Jackson saw it, the slight delay in Dex's eye movements when he looked at certain parts of the schematic, the way his cybernetic implants flickered almost imperceptibly. Military-grade surveillance equipment designed to record everything he saw and heard. "It's you," Jackson said quietly. "You're the traitor." Dex's hand moved toward his weapon, but Jackson was already diving, tackling Kira behind a massive piece of machinery as energy bolts filled the air where they'd been standing. The factory erupted in chaos as enforcement squads poured through entrances Jackson hadn't even seen. "I'm sorry," Dex called out over the sound of weapons fire, "but Vex has my daughter. I had to choose." Jackson and Kira fought their way through the factory, using their knowledge of industrial environments to stay ahead of their pursuers, but they were outnumbered 20-1, and the exits were blocked. "The old cooling system," Kira shouted, pointing to a massive pipe that ran along the ceiling. "It connects to the main processing plant." They climbed through a maze of machinery, energy bolts scorching the air around them. Behind them, Dex's voice echoed through the factory. "They're heading for the thermal exhaust. Cut them off at the processing plant." The pipe was narrow and filled with scalding steam, but it led them out of the immediate danger zone. They emerged onto the factory's roof just as the first news drones arrived, broadcasting the firefight to the entire city. "Look," Kira said, pointing to the streets below. Crowds were gathering, humans mostly, but some Xerians and other species as well. They carried improvised banners and signs, some bearing Jackson's image from the wanted posters. The rescue attempt was becoming something larger, something Vex couldn't contain with simple enforcement action. "We have to reach the tower," Jackson said. "If your father dies, this revolution dies with him." They commandeered a hoverbike from the factory's security station and raced through streets that were rapidly filling with protesters. The mood was electric, dangerous, decades of suppressed anger finally finding an outlet. The obsidian tower loomed above them, its black surfaces reflecting the city's neon like a dark mirror. Enforcement squads surrounded the building, but they were facing crowds on all sides now. The revolution had begun, whether Jackson and Kira reached Thane Voss or not. "Level 47, Kira said, studying the building's external structure. "I can see the detention cells from here." They abandoned the hoverbike and moved through the crowds, using the chaos as cover. The tower's main entrance was impossible, but the service levels were less heavily guarded. They fought their way through corridors filled with government workers, fleeing the violence outside. On level 43, they encountered Commander Vex himself. He was tall even for a Xerian, his ceremonial armor gleaming with rank insignia. His face was a map of old scars, and his eyes held the cold calculation of someone who'd built a career on other people's suffering. "The famous cargo hauler," Vex said, his voice carrying the authority of absolute power. "Do you have any idea What you've started? I have some idea, Jackson replied, raising his weapon. A revolution that will fail. Your species lacks the discipline for sustained resistance. In 3 days, maybe 4, they'll return to their jobs and their quiet desperation. But you'll be dead, and your lover will watch you die. Kira stepped forward, her own weapon. Trained on Vex. Where's my father? Close enough to hear your screams. Vex activated a personal shield generator, the energy field shimmering around him like heat haze. Did you really think 2 fugitives could assault the heart of Nexus authority and succeed? The battle that followed was brutal and desperate. Vex was enhanced with military cybernetics, faster and stronger than any normal being. But Jackson had fought enhanced opponents before, and Kira fought with the fury of someone who'd lost everything. When Vex finally fell, his shield generator overloaded and sparking, the revolution was echoing through the streets below like thunder. The cell keys, Kira said, searching Vex's body. Level 47, maximum security. They had 4 floors to climb, and an army of enforcers between them and Thane Voss. But outside, the city was burning with the light of change, and nothing would ever be the same. The detention level of the Obsidian Tower was a sterile nightmare of white walls and humming energy barriers. Jackson and Kira moved through corridors lined with cells, each one containing another victim of Vex's regime, humans, Zerians, and species. Jackson didn't recognize, all united in their suffering. "Father?" Kira's voice echoed off the walls as they searched. "Cell 47 Alpha," came a weak response from the end of the corridor. Thane Voss looked nothing like the heroic figure from the rebel broadcasts. Months of imprisonment had left him, gaunt and pale, his once proud military bearing reduced to the careful movements of someone nursing internal injuries. But his eyes, the same violet shade as his daughter's, still burned with undiminished fire. "Kira!" His voice broke as she deactivated the cell's energy barrier. "They told me you were dead." "Almost," she said, falling into his arms. "But someone decided I was worth saving." Thane's gaze shifted to Jackson, taking in the human's military bearing, the competent way he held his weapon, the protective stance he maintained despite the reunion taking place before him. "You're the cargo hauler." It wasn't a question. "The one who started all this. I just cut down a girl who shouldn't have been for sale," Jackson replied. Everything else followed from that. Through the tower's windows, they could see the city burning, not with destruction, but with the light of change. Massive crowds filling every street, enforcement squads retreating to fortified positions, government buildings being occupied by citizens who'd finally found their voice. "The evidence," Thane said urgently. "Vex's files, the communication logs with the Homeworld Military Command. Did you recover them?" "That wasn't exactly our priority," Jackson admitted. "It has to be yours now." Thane struggled to his feet, supported by Kira. "Without proof of the conspiracy, this revolution will be painted as a terrorist uprising. The Homeworld will send peacekeepers to restore order, and everything you've accomplished will be crushed." They made their way to the tower's command center, fighting through scattered resistance from Vex's remaining loyalists. The revolution in the streets had drawn most of the enforcers away, but those who remained fought with the desperation of people who knew their cause was lost. In a corridor junction near the command center, they ran into the last organized resistance, a squad of Zerian military police in full combat armor. The firefight was vicious and close quarters, energy bolts scorching the walls around them. Jackson saw the plasma grenade arcing toward Kira a split second before it would have taken her head off. He threw himself forward, taking the blast meant for her. The explosion sent him crashing into the wall, his left side torn open, blood pooling beneath him on the polished floor. "Jackson!" Kira's scream cut through the ringing in his ears. "The files!" he gasped, fighting to stay conscious. "Get the files!" Kira and her father fought their way to the command center, while Jackson lay bleeding in the corridor, listening to the sounds of revolution echoing up from the streets below. Through a shattered window, he could see humans and aliens standing together, demanding change, refusing to be ignored any longer. When Kira returned, her face was streaked with tears, but her expression was triumphant. "We have everything: communications with the homeworld, transfer orders, financial records, enough to expose the whole conspiracy." Jackson tried to smile, but the effort sent fresh waves of pain through his torn body. "Good, that's good." The medical team that arrived with the rebel forces gave him a 30% chance of survival. The plasma grenade had done internal damage that would require surgery beyond their field capabilities, but as they loaded him onto a medical transport, Jackson felt strangely at peace. He'd spent years fighting in wars that meant nothing, following orders that served only the powerful. For once in his life, he'd stood for something that mattered. 3 months later, he woke up in a medical facility that had once been reserved for alien dignitaries. The revolution had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations, not just in Nexus Prime, but across a dozen worlds where Thane's evidence had sparked similar uprisings. "You're awake," Kira said from the chair beside his bed. She looked different, older somehow, wearing the practical clothes of someone with serious responsibilities. "The doctor said you might not make it. I'm harder to kill than I look." His voice was raspy from weeks of unconsciousness. "How long?" 3 months. "You missed the transitional government, the trials, the constitutional convention." She smiled, but there was sadness in it. "You missed our wedding too, but I figured you'd want to be awake for that." "Wedding? Well, someone has to make an honest woman of me eventually." She leaned down to kiss him, and he tasted salt from her tears. "That is, if you're interested in marrying a diplomat." "Diplomat? Ambassador to the human territories. Someone has to represent our new government in the peace negotiations." She showed him the official credentials, embossed with the seal of the Free Worlds Alliance. Turns out, being the daughter of a rebel leader and the lover of a revolutionary hero carries some political weight. Jackson looked out the window at the city beyond. The neon was still there, but it seemed different now, brighter somehow, less oppressive. In the streets below, humans and aliens moved freely together, no longer segregated by species or class. "So, what's a cargo hauler supposed to do in a free galaxy?" he asked. "Protect the peace," Kira said, settling back into her chair. "Lead by example. Show people that sometimes someone who's worth saving is worth fighting for." "And maybe," she added with a smile that reminded him of that first moment in the bazaar, "help me figure out how to build a government that actually serves its people instead of selling them." Outside, the city hummed with the sound of construction, not just of buildings, but of a new kind of society. And in a medical room high above the streets where it had all begun, 2 people who'd learned to love in the shadow of revolution planned their future in the light of freedom. The girl who'd been tied to a billboard was now an ambassador. The cargo hauler who'd cut her down was now a symbol of hope. And together, they would make sure that no one would ever be for sale again. Some prices were worth paying, some fights were worth having, and some love was strong enough to change the galaxy.